In this video, I want to show you the first of 3 different methods for sanding and refining your footstool. So as I said, there's 3 methods, and they're different because they go from inexpensive, time-consuming, and labor-intensive on the one end of things. That's the method I'm going to show you first, all the way through to something that involves more power tools, works faster, maybe works better too, but then it does cost money, creates noise, and creates airborne dust. So you're going to be able to choose on this spectrum of how you go about doing things. But first, we're going to take this thing apart, because unlike a real project, so a project where I wasn't teaching you something, the regular procedure would have been to finish these parts before they come together. Maybe not before they come together the first time, because you want to make sure they do come together properly. But normally, things are sanded before they come together. There'll be a little bit of sanding after they're together, but most of it's going to happen before. And so we got to take this thing apart. Either that, or you need to make a second stool that you don't actually put together for the last time. So in this case, if you remember, I used structural screws, and they require a Torx bit in order to drive them in and out. Torx looks like this, and you can get that sort of bit in the form of a driver bit like this that fits into an individual screwdriver, and we can work that way. Works fine. But I would like to take this opportunity to talk to you about using power tools to drive screws. So in a sense, this is kind of a teaching tangent, in that you probably aren't going to be power driving your screws in and out right now, but you should know that this is the standard way things are done in the industry. Now, the easiest option for you is just to use a regular cordless drill. So this is the same kind of tool that you would have used to drill the holes for the screws initially, but it can also drive screws with the driver bit. You can use any kind of driver bit that fits the screw head involved, and you can just put it in there. This is called the chuck, and I'm tightening the chuck onto the bit now. And drills like this can rotate one way, that's tightening, and they can rotate another way, that's loosening. And they do usually have a kind of a transmission. So this would be the lowest gear. So it's going to turn the slowest, but with the most power. And if I wanted to drill, I would put it into the second speed, second gear, and it's going to spin faster for a given trigger position. But right now, we just want to take some screws out. So a lot faster than a hand driver. There's no reason why you can't drive all kinds of screws in and out with a cordless drill. However, since we're on a kind of a teaching tangent thing here, I want to briefly introduce you to a power tool that looks similar to a drill, but it's different. This is called an impact driver, and it's especially made for driving screws in and out. Now, you can get drill bits that fit tools like this too for drilling holes, but they're primarily designed for driving screws. So the first big difference you'll see is that it doesn't have a chuck the same way this does, but it does have something to grab onto driver bits. And that's this little spring-loaded collar, like this. So if you've got a bit with a groove around the base like this, then you can just simply push it in, and it's locked. And if I wanted to take that out, I push the spring-loaded collar forward and pull the bit out. The claim to fame of impact drivers is that they deliver more screw driving power for a given motor size and battery capacity. But the biggest thing of all is that they tend to stay engaged. The driver tip tends to stay engaged more thoroughly with the screw head. So you're not going to get it jumping out or rounding out or things like that. So this will be fine for years, but eventually, if you want the ultimate screw driving tool, an impact driver is the way to go. Not so much for indoor woodworking projects like this, because there's not a whole lot of screws in projects like this, but ideally for outdoor stuff, if you're building a deck or other woodworking projects that require a lot of screws to be driven, then this is the thing. For now, though, I'll just pop these screws out. Because our job now is about smoothing and refinement. This is a nice solid footstool, but it doesn't look nearly as good as it could. And that's our job at the moment. So. Okay, I'm going to also mark these as well. So we want to make sure that they easily go back into the same orientation when we put the project together again. Eventually, because the holes aren't exactly symmetrical from one side to the other, we could determine which part goes where, but why struggle? So I'll call this one, say, top. Let's see, we'll make this top 2. Okay, so that's the top end, number 2, and this would be the, let's see, the bottom end. I'm drawing upside down here, so if I make a mistake, you'll know why. Bottom 2. And then over here, top 1. And bottom 1. Notice I made those marks where we don't have to sand them off when we do our work. Because on the top here, we're not going to be spending any time making that look nice, because that's going to be hidden by the top. Same goes here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the bottom making it smooth. So it's a safe place to put your marks. Until now, we haven't really treated the wood we're working with gently. We've put it down on whatever we needed to put it down on. We've marked it. We've cut it. There hasn't been a lot of careful handling of the wood because there's been no reason for it. All we were interested in is cutting and fitting the parts together. But now we're going to shift gears a bit, and we do want to treat our wood gently. Because we're going to be sanding, but there's no point in sanding something only to have the bottom pick up, dirt and dents and all kinds of things. So an excellent way to sand properly, so your efforts actually count for something, is to sand on a surface that won't hurt the wood. So this is a piece of foam that I had around. Foam works great for this. It's very gentle on the wood. You could use a piece of old carpet, some old blankets, a couple of layers of old blankets. Just something to put on your surface so that the wood isn't damaged. We don't get any more dents or dings or dirt or anything like that. So if you remember, this is one of 3 methods of refining your footstool and any other wood projects you've got on the go. And this is entirely by hand. So it's going to be quiet. There's not going to be any significant airborne dust. You're not going to have to spend more than about $5 on sandpaper. So it's economical and it's simple and you don't need any electricity. You can do it anywhere. The one drawback, though, is that it's going to take a while. So you need to adopt a patient attitude. And you also need to start with the right kind of sandpaper. So this is the top, as you'll remember, and I am going to start by sanding the end. This is cut with a handsaw, kind of rough. We want this to be quite a bit smoother. And this sanding application here is quite demanding. So we're going to start with some excellent quality sandpaper. This is the 3M Pro Grade sandpaper I really like. And look here, 80 grit. So good and fine, good and coarse, good and aggressive. But we're not going to sand by hand. We're not just going to sit here and go like this, because that's not going to be as even as we want. And it's not going to take down the high spots. Because if you look at this in the light, you'll see that there's a series of high spots, like where the saw blade cut a little bit further in than others. That's completely normal, but that's what we want to get rid of. And that's where this foam block comes in. It's fairly rigid. It's the same stuff that this is made of, so it's fairly firm. I can't really squish it any more than that, even on the edge. But it's not as hard as a piece of wood. I wouldn't bother with a piece of wood here because it doesn't have enough give to be a good sanding block. But this is actually a perfect material for a sanding block. And there's nothing to it really. We're just that's already looking an awful lot better. We still have some ridging down here, and then kind of a biggish one here. So I will keep going. But one thing when it comes to sandpaper, don't be afraid to throw a piece away and get a fresh piece. Sandpaper is much more effective when it's fresh than when it's getting old, and there's no point in chasing around 25 cents worth of sandpaper just to squeeze a little bit more life out of it when it's taking you tons of time. So refresh that sandpaper maybe after every 5 minutes of the kind of sanding that you see me do now, and stick with the 80 grit until all of the marks are gone. So all of the saw marks need to be completely gone before we stop using the 80 grit. It's looking pretty good there. We're sanded almost as much as we need to be over here. Still have some stuff to work on there. I think I'm going to change paper. Get a fresh piece working here. That's looking pretty good. But I really can't tell how good it is because of the light. Reflected light is a tremendous advantage when it comes to assessing how well sanding's going. You really can't do it properly without reflected light. And I'm quite pleased with what I see here. The only remaining saw marks are over here. Very, very fine. But I'm not going to make the mistake of going to the next higher grit, which in this case would be 120, without removing those marks, because they'll probably stick around. So a little more sanding with the 80, and then we'll take another look. This is looking really good now. The smoother it gets, the more prominent the growth rings in the wood will become, and the prettier this is going to look. So we've done this with the 80 grit paper. Now, I guess as far as this edge goes, the next step would be to sand it with 120, and then 180, and then 220. That's the procedure, but really we should sand the whole thing to 80 before we go on. So we'll do this whole part. And whereas it was easy to see which direction to sand the end, we certainly would not have sanded it this way. That wouldn't have made any sense. We sanded it this way because it was easy to do and effective. But when it comes to the top, we've got a bit of a choice. The rule of thumb for sanding is to always sand in the direction of the grain. So that's back and forth here. If we sand this way, and you can see it already. Scratches. All kinds of scratches. And that's just going to look horrific if you ever put any stain on it. So we're sanding parallel to the grain, with the grain, and evenly too. So we don't want to just, we don't want to concentrate on one spot. Like I've got this grade stamp to get rid of. I don't want to go, at least I don't want to do that too much, because if I do, I'm going to get a lower spot there. So I want even sanding all the way back and forth. It's already starting to look cleaner, isn't it? Hand sanding does create some sawdust, but as you see, it's fairly coarse and it just kind of sits there. It doesn't actually go in the air. I mean, I have a powerful light on this work spot right now, and I'm seeing no sawdust flying around in the air. So, whereas we would want to use a mask, a protective mask, when we're power sanding, we don't need to do that when we're hand sanding. It's already looking better, isn't it? I haven't even been working at it for too long. But I still need to work on it some more because you can see there's some ink left here from the grade stamp. And you can also see some faint lines, wide lines that go across the board. And once again, that's from the planer knives that chewed off the wood when this board was rough and turned it smooth. We're only sanding the high spots on those undulations, so we need to keep going. And it doesn't really take that long. It's just one of those things that seems to take longer than it does, but put on some good music in your shop and just go a little bit zen. And just think about the process and not so much getting to the destination. One thing I've noticed, see, we have some sawdust buildup here. Sanding works better if I clean some of this off, because if the sawdust remains, it kind of stops in some places. It stops the sandpaper from fully touching the wood. So clean it off every so often. We're doing really well. All the ink's gone. Planer mark's almost gone here. A little more to do here. But still, in less than 10 minutes of sanding, we're going to get this all nice and smooth. So, you getting the idea of what hand sanding is all about? I've done the top here just with the 80 grit. So, come and take a look. It's looking pretty good. There is a little mark here, 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 and here. Maybe there was something in the planing operation that made a repetitive little ding here. But really that should go. So a little more 80 grit sanding there. And then of course, edges and ends. And when you're finished with the 80, well then you've got to move to the 120 and then the 180 and then finish up with the 220. That'll be as smooth as you need to make it. And that's not the end of the treatment we're going to do before we actually apply a finish to the footstool, but it does get us to the next level. So did that really take a long time? I mean, it feels like it takes longer than it does. So it's not that onerous, especially for a small project like this. However, if you do want to speed things up and you do want to make quicker work of getting rid of little imperfections like that, then I want to show you method number 2 for sanding projects. And that's a kind of a hybrid approach that uses one kind of power sander. This is a random orbit sander, plus some hand sanding to get to the same place that we would get to if we did it entirely with hand sanding. So that's what's coming up in the next video.